meeting to order, and before we have our first witness, there's a few motions we need to deal with. Ms. Sandals.
Okay. The Standing Committee on Public Accounts invite Dr. Chris Mazza to appear before the committee at 9 a.m. in Committee Room 151. You can fill in the blah, 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 where, on Wednesday, July 18th, 2012.
Any discussion? All in favor? Carried.
Committee on Public Accounts seek the authorization of the House leaders for each of the recognized parties to permit the committee to sit on Wednesday, July 18th, 2012, for the specific purpose of hearing from Dr. Chris Mazza relating to the 2012 special report of the Office of the Auditor General of Ontario on Orange Air Ambulance and related services.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Carried.
So then the next one is Mr. Clees.
Mr. Clees.
Any of the ones that he has.
Do you have some motions?
I think I have three here, right?
Okay. First one, please.
That the Standing Committee on Public Accounts, pursuant to Standing Order 110B, whereby each committee shall have power to send for persons, papers, and things, request a copy of any and all correspondence, including letters and or emails, from the Associate Deputy Minister of Health, Hugh MacLeod, to Malcolm Bates, Director of the Emergency Health Services Branch, and Dennis Brown of the Ministry of Health, Dennis Brown and any other person at the EHS branch in which the Associate Deputy Minister references Orange or gives direction concerning the role that the EHS branch is to have concerning Orange, or relates to allowing Dr. Mazza to do whatever he determines appropriate at Orange, and not to obstruct him during the period October 1, 2005 and the last day of February 2007, or makes any reference to how the EHS branch and its staff is to monitor, oversee, hold accountable, or review the performance of Orange, and that said correspondence be delivered to the Clerk of the Public Accounts Committee no later than Thursday, May 31st, 2012.
Any discussion? All in favor? Carried. Please.
That the Standing Committee on Public Accounts, pursuant to Standing Order 110B, whereby each committee shall have power to send for persons, papers, and things, call Fred Rusk, former employee at the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care Emergency Health Services Branch, to testify before this committee.
Yeah, we don't have to do with
Oh, we don't have to do those?
Yeah, you don't.
Okay, there we go.
To do is the persons, papers, or things one. Back. The very first one.
This one here?
The budget one. Yeah.
Okay. That the Standing Committee on Public Accounts, pursuant to Standing Order 110B, request a copy of the 2012-2013 balanced budget from Orange that was approved by its Board of Directors.
Discussion?
Just a friendly amendment. How about we just ask for the budget?
The only reason I use that wording is because that was what Orange told me the document was called.
The balanced budget?
That's what they said that they referenced in the STAR article. So, and that was what the specific request was. If you want to amend it, that's fine. That was just the...
Yeah, I just want to be sure that we get the document that was referenced in the Toronto Star.
And
okay.
They said that was what the document was.
Okay.
And that's the other one you need to move there.
Okay, all in favor? Carried. And
One more?
One more?
Yeah. That the Standing Committee on Public Accounts, pursuant to Standing Order 110B, whereby each committee shall have power to send for persons, papers, and things, request a copy of the tariff schedule prepared by Orange to comply with CTA regulations, and further a copy of any MOU or agreement between Orange and Orange Air related to the provision of air services and related costing.
Any discussion? All in favor? Carried. That is it, I believe, for a motion. Okay, that's it for the motion. So I'd now like to invite our first, our only witness of the morning, Mr. Tom Rothfels, to come forward, please. And good morning, welcome. And just to confirm that you did receive a letter outlining information for a witness appearing before the committee?
Yes, I did.
Okay, very well. And our clerk has an oath for you to swear.
Did you want to swear an oath or be affirmed, Mr. Rothfeld?
I'll be affirmed.
Be affirmed? Okay. Mr. Rothfeld, do you solemnly affirm that the evidence you shall give to this committee touching the subject of the present inquiry shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
And you have 6 minutes for an opening statement, and then we'll have questions from the parties.
I don't have an opening statement. I thought I'd just give the time over to you for questions.
Okay, then we'll start official opposition, and we'll start in 20 minutes, 20-minute intervals, and see how much time we have left after that. So go ahead, Mr. Cleese.
Thank you, Mr. Rothfeld, for being here this morning, and we know that certainly according to your CV, you have extensive experience in the aviation field and held a very responsible position at Orange. Can you tell us how it came that you were hired into your position at Orange, and did Mr. Alfred Apps have anything to do with bringing you into Orange?
Yes. I got a call essentially out of the blue from Alfred introducing himself and saying that he was acting on behalf of Orange, who I didn't really know, and would I be interested in having a chat as Orange was looking for some aviation expertise. We arranged a time to meet. I met with Mr. Apps for probably an hour, hour and a half or so in his office, and he outlined what Orange was, what their requirements were, what Dr. Mazza was looking for, and asked if I would be willing to meet with Dr. Mazza, and I said I would.
Did Mr. Apps give you any indication of what his relationship was with Orange and what role he played there?
Yeah, he said he was senior legal counsel.
Did he give you any indication at that time? And can you give us an approximate date of when you might have met with Mr. Apps?
Probably, if I recall, spring of 07, so let's say April of 07.
In that conversation in the spring of 07, did Mr. Apps share with you what the future plans were of Orange, and specifically, did he discuss at all the broader international scope that they had in mind?
Yes. He said that Orange had determined that there was an opportunity to enter the international sphere in repatriation, if you will, of injured people, bringing back injured or sick individuals to Ontario with international emergency medical evacuation, and that in fact Orange had hired some consultants previously who developed a business plan, and Orange was going to use that as a basis to go international for EMS.
Okay. When you took on your role, and what was your title?
They called me the Chief Operating Officer for Orange International.
For Orange International. And Orange International then was one of those for-profit companies?
No, as far as I know, Orange International was never created. It wasn't a for-profit company. It wasn't anything. They just gave it that name. But I'm not aware of any company ever having been formed with that name.
Isn't that interesting? So you were the COO of nothing?
Exactly.
Well, I'd like to.
Who was not the COO of something.
So it's very interesting.
It was funny though.
I'd like to pursue what it is that you did for this company, then Orange International. And I'd like to fast forward to the acquisition of the AW139s. What role did you have in that acquisition?
Okay, if I can just take 2 seconds. This international part of it, when I got to Orange, they handed me this business plan that had been developed by these consultants, and I told Chris that it wasn't worth the paper it was written on. There was no possible way to implement this, and it was just a piece of garbage, and if that was their plan, count me out. I very quickly then was asked to get involved in the process to acquire the helicopters. And so we set up a process under which we would acquire these aircraft. There was a team set up internally at Orange, of which I was part. But we also had outsiders involved as well. We went through a selection process to find what we called a fairness advisor. We hired PricewaterhouseCoopers as the fairness advisor for this process so that the people who were bidding on the aircraft could have an independent source if they had concerns about the transparency, legitimacy, or adequacy of the process. We also went out and went through a process to hire what we call purchase advisors, people who were highly experienced in acquiring major aircraft. We hired a company called M-Powered Solutions, a fellow out of McMillan Binch, and an associate of his, and there was a team involved at Orange. So we went through, first we went through a selection process to look at the available aircraft that are out there that could conceivably meet the mission that Orange required. And we defined Orange's rotary wing mission in terms of the weight it needed to be able to carry, the distance it needed to be able to fly, and the technical aspects of the aircraft that we required. We determined that there were essentially 3 aircraft make and models that met these standards. We created a request for information, a fairly substantial document with all of the technical specifications. We passed that through our fairness advisor. We went through a process outlined with the fairness advisor to make sure that they were comfortable that we had an open, transparent, and fair process. And then we sent it out to those 3 companies, which were Sikorsky, Eurocopter, and AgustaWestland. All 3 submitted very substantial responses to that document. Binders probably, on average, about, I guess you can't, a foot high of responding.
I appreciate all of that detail.
Yeah.
Can I, with your
Sure.
permission, I'd like to just get on to the actual deal if I could. We're limited in time.
Okay.
Suffice it to say that you were satisfied that it was an exhaustive process, that it was competitive, and that in the final analysis the decision was made, as we understand it, to go with the AW139s with Augusta.
Yes. Yes.
And can I ask, what was your role on that negotiating team?
I was then asked to lead the negotiations for the acquisition. So again, we had this team of people. There were a team of people within Orange, as well as the fairness advisor, legal counsel, purchase advisors, but I led the team, led the negotiations, which then took place over 6 to 8 weeks. Over which period of time we negotiated the actual deal with Augusta.
And who was on the Augusta side of the negotiating team?
It was led by Lou Bartolotta, and he had a couple of more junior people with him.
And was Mr. Mazza involved on your side?
Yes, not directly in the negotiations, but before we started the negotiations, I laid out a list of all of our positions, a list of where Augusta was, and how we might be able to solve the differences. And then I regularly updated Dr. Mazza every couple of days or every few days with where the negotiations were, where the differences were, would get advice from him as to what he thought we should do in terms of how to move forward.
So he was fully apprised of the ongoing negotiations.
Absolutely.
Obviously had input through you.
Absolutely.
I understand that Maria Renzella was also involved.
Yes.
Was she actively engaged with you in that process?
Not in the negotiations. She was part of the selection group. She was part of the process, but she wasn't there in the room for the negotiations.
Okay. So the deal was concluded. The amount of the purchase, the final purchase price for the helicopters was what?
Roughly $12 million and change per aircraft.
Okay. Now, I'd like to pursue an interesting element of this deal. You negotiated the purchase of the aircraft. I understand that subsequent to signing the deal for the $144 million, that you heard back from Augusta, and as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, they advised you of some good news, and the good news that they had qualified for an upgraded weight category. And because of that good news, they were going to assess you for an additional, how much?
I think it's a little over $600,000 per aircraft.
Per aircraft. So here's the good news. We got this, upgraded regulatory blessing, and for that good news now, Augusta, you're going to pay another $600,000 per aircraft. What was your response?
Nice try. You know, this is the sort of thing that goes on, and no harm, no foul, but it clearly was completely inappropriate, and there was no way. We had covered this off in the purchase agreement. There was no way that Orange would be required to pay this. So
you're an astute business person. This isn't the first time you've been through this. You covered that weight issue off in your agreement, and as far as you were concerned, it was incorporated into that original purchase price.
Absolutely. And
Dr. Mazza was aware of that as well.
Yes.
And so you went back to them and said under no circumstances, and what was the outcome of that secondary negotiation that you had with Augusta?
By that point, Rick Potter had assumed responsibility for the relationship with Augusta, and I was involved in other areas. So when Augusta asked for that extra $600,000, I pointed out both to, well, actually to everybody, to Rick Potter, to Maria Renzella, to Chris Mazza, the two sections in the purchase agreement where we had covered this off and said we absolutely didn't have to pay for this. And do you want me to describe those areas in the purchase agreement?
We don't have.
Okay.
It's sufficient to know that that was covered off.
Absolutely.
Mr. Potter testified here when he was here that he went back to Augusta and successfully negotiated away that $600,000 per aircraft.
Well, right. I mean, I guess what he did was pointed out to them that it had already been covered off, so, you know, no.
Okay. So, as we understand it, and is this your, did Mr. Potter come back and report to you and the rest of the team of his successful negotiation?
Yes.
And what was the reaction?
Great.
And are you aware of what took place when Mr. Potter advised Dr. Mazza of his success?
I wasn't there in the room, but it's my understanding that Chris was relatively cool to that news and was not enthusiastic about the fact that that payment was not going to be made. But as I said, I wasn't in the room, but I do recall that the reaction that Rick got was not positive.
And is it true that Dr. Mazza subsequently insisted that Orange pay that $600,000 per aircraft?
That's my understanding.
And then, subsequent to that, obviously we have to do something. The $600,000 per aircraft was then paid to Augusta, and there is a sense that that created some problem then for probably people like Mr. Potter. You were no longer in the picture directly, but I would expect Ms. Renzella, and perhaps who was the legal responsible for?
Cindy Hines was acting as corporate counsel at that point.
So I understand it fell to them now to structure an agreement between Orange and Augusta that would somehow recover that $600,000, because having negotiated the $600,000 away, insisting that the $600,000 would be paid to Augusta, Augusta now obviously was in hand of a lot of money that they had agreed not to charge. Tell us what happened then, to your best understanding. Who was charged with negotiating what I understand is referred to as a marketing agreement?
Well, I do need to state that I was not directly involved in this, so and so there were, you know, I don't have direct knowledge of this, but it was my understanding that both Maria Renzella and Cindy Hines were primarily responsible for carrying out the directive that they got from Chris to come up with a marketing services agreement.
And that was basically to paper, essentially, the kickback of that money into one of the Orange companies. Is that right?
Well, again, I wasn't directly involved, so there may have been other things that I wasn't aware of. I'm not aware of anything else, but that certainly could be one explanation.
Mr. Rothfels, you're a very astute business person, and while you weren't directly involved, these are not things that are hidden within the executive group of a company like this, and I would expect, sir, that you, when you heard about this and you knew what the flow of money was, that you would have had some concern. Did you have any concern about what was going on in this agreement?
Yes. Yeah, I did have some concerns.
What's your immediate reaction when you became aware that this flow of money was taking place? What did your gut tell you?
Well, I was very uncomfortable. I knew in terms of the purchase agreement that there was no requirement to pay this. I'd heard about this marketing services agreement. Wasn't aware of the terms of it, but it didn't smell right, I suppose.
Did you express your concern to any of your colleagues at Orange?
Yes, I think I reiterated a number of times to Rick Potter, to Cindy Hines, to Maria Renzella, and to Chris Mazza that the $600,000 weight upgrade was a fictional charge and that Orange should not be paying it.
Did the term fraud ever cross your mind when you were contemplating this?
It certainly, again, it crossed my mind.
Did you ever express that in those terms to any of your colleagues?
I don't actually recall if I used that word. It was certainly in my mind, but I don't recall if I used that word to them.
Okay. If you don't mind, I don't know, because we do have other rounds, would you mind if I just continue and kind of wrap up this line of questioning?
Certainly, if the other parties don't mind,
I'll give it to you on the other end, right? Is that okay? I just
continue.
Mr. Rothfels, we had here some very senior people, whether it's Mr. Potter, Ms. Renzella, certainly Cynthia Hines, whose background as a lawyer would have triggered her, I would think, and Ms. Renzella as well as Mr. Potter, in the same way that it triggered you. Something is fundamentally wrong here. And yet they were charged with implementing this strategy. Did you ever express your concern to any member of the board?
Yes.
And who was that?
Don Law.
And what was the response from this member of the board?
He expressed some concern and surprise and indicated that he would look into it, but I think his feeling was that the lawyers had covered this or papered it or something to that effect.
Knowing what the fiduciary responsibilities of a director are, did it concern you that would be the response of a member of the board, that the legals had papered it?
You know, by that, the timing was that once I had expressed these concerns about this transaction internally and was quite vocal about it, I became persona non grata internally at Orange. And within a few months, I had left Orange, and the meeting that I had with Don Lowe took place a week or so after I left Orange. I felt I had a responsibility to make sure at least someone on the board was aware of my thoughts, and so I had that meeting.
Would you say that the reason that you ended up leaving Orange is because you had expressed your concern about what was going on around this deal?
Well, you'd have to, I think that that was certainly part of it, yes. I'm sure there were other, you know, there may have been other issues as well, but I'm, you know, that the organization was such that you were either with the organization or not, and clearly I was not.
Did any other members of the executive, your colleagues, ever express to you their concern about what they saw going on, whether it was, and let's just stay with this deal, did anyone confide in you to say, look, I have serious concerns about this?
I think that most of the people who were aware that the weight upgrade charge was not appropriate and who were aware that Orange was going to pay it anyway probably had some level of discomfort with that.
Okay. And but they were silenced?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Can I just, can I ask you, were there other issues that concerned you in the organization that caused you to question whether you should be working and associated with this organization?
Yes. You know, the work that Orange does on the front lines is absolutely spectacular. There is no other organization in the world that operates across, other than militaries, that operate across the breadth and depth and the horrendous conditions, weather-wise and everything else that Orange does. But Orange, up until that time, had been primarily a medically driven organization. It had no institutional history of operating aircraft. And to go from not operating aircraft to acquiring complex, medium-weight, twin-engine helicopters in an IFR environment is not something that you do lightly. And so with no institutional capability or history, it concerned me greatly that Orange was about to undertake this in a very short period of time. And so I came up with a plan to joint venture with the world's largest operator of this class and this type of aircraft, with the AW139, to help us, to help Orange learn how to do this and do it safely, properly, and within all of the guidelines that were required. When that began to be shunted aside and I realized that Orange was essentially going to go alone, it gave me great concern.
We've had other testimony here to the effect that the concept was far beyond the core competency of the individuals who were then put in charge of this very complex, far-reaching organization. And you're agreeing with that?
You know, as I said, there was no institutional history. There was no one there who had ever operated aircraft, let alone, you know, a mixed fleet of fixed wing and rotary wing complex aircraft.
Prior to, if I can refer to it as the Mazza scheme, the aircraft side of it was contracted out to experienced air carriers who then complemented, obviously, the healthcare side of it Would you agree that where things started to go off the rails here was when, in fact, under the Mazza scheme, all of that air carrier responsibility was brought in-house and essentially overwhelmed the people who, as you say, didn't have the institutional knowledge, didn't have the core competency to cope with that? Is that a fair statement?
I think that that's certainly part of it. The justification internally for doing this was that the costs that were being charged by these third-party carriers were unsustainable in the long term, and the only viable solution was for Orange to bring it in-house.
Thank you. Just as a layman, my last question to you. As a layman, going back to that marketing agreement that would you characterize that as a layman as a kickback within the industry?
Oh boy. Again, I wasn't party to whatever other discussions may have gone on between between Augusta and Orange. There may have been other things. All I can say is that I wasn't comfortable with it, and from what I saw, it certainly bore some. There were issues there.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you. So you used 26 minutes, so perhaps we'll have 26 minutes for each of the other parties then. So
It's just to cut it up, just to be different.
you're welcome to if you so desire.
You want to start, or I start? Okay.
Ms. Jellins.
I will go back to the line of questioning that my colleague started, but just a few housekeeping before I do this. The first one is, were you aware of Mr. Mazza's salary during your tenure at Orange?
No.
No. Were you aware of any other executive salary during your time at Orange?
No.
Okay. We can see that your salary increased during the period of time you were at Orange. How were those increases awarded?
I don't recall that there was any substantial increase in my. There was a bonus structure that was added to my compensation once I started to get involved in some of the serious negotiations for the acquisition of the aircraft and the plans to subsequent to that. But the base salary was not.
Okay. And while you were there, although you were with Orange International, which I guess is a title, means all of the business that was to do international would have fall under you, or?
Well, I was never involved in anything other than initially telling them that their business plan that they had for international wasn't worth the paper it was written on. Beyond that, I had no involvement in anything international.
And that did not gain you any popularity points?
I don't think that they were completely wedded to that plan when I got there, so they dropped it fairly quickly.
Okay. Coming back to what went on, so the deal is being negotiated. We've had Jacob Blum here to testify. He was there part of the time that you were there, and he testified that he met with Ministry of Health official on a weekly basis. Even give us, usually on a Friday afternoon, the time, date, place, etc., that those meetings took place. During the time that this was being discussed, was any of this ever shared outside of the organization? The fact that you were negotiating a purchase, the discrepancy between what you wanted and what, like the briefing that you would get to Chris as to where are things progressing before the 600,000 I'm talking about. Was this ever shared with anybody at the ministry?
I don't know. I wasn't involved in any discussions, briefings, or anything else outside of Orange. So if there were any conversations like that, you'd have to ask people who did those briefings.
And in your knowledge, in the management team, who, when there was question coming from the ministry, who would have answered those questions?
I was so far removed from that, I'm not sure. I do recall that some combination of Jacob, Chris, and occasionally I think Tom Lapine were involved in briefings to various people at the ministry. But again, That just wasn't anything I was involved in.
Okay. You did say that it was Mr. Apps who first approached you to join Orange. What were some of the other dealings that Mr. Apps did for Orange?
In the time that I was there, Alf certainly acted as the senior legal counsel. So as we were negotiating the deals with Augusta, as we were selecting fairness advisors, purchase advisors, Alf was the senior lawyer who reviewed all of the documents and approved, frankly, gave final approval to whatever documents that we issued. I was heavily involved in an RFI to select the helicopter operator. There was another one for, looking at this joint venture we were trying to set up with Orange. So, Alf he may not have been involved on the day-to-day basis of discussions and negotiations, but certainly he was the lawyer that the other people on the Faskins team reported to and got approval from.
Okay. So if we look more specifically at the deal, so you did an RFP, RFI, started negotiations, then Rick Potter finished the deal where the extra cost for the extra weight was brought forward. Then this deal was sent to Cynthia Hines, Maria, and Rick to figure out and to put on paper. Would Mr. Apps have signed off on the final of those agreements as well, like he had oversees everything else legally that went on?
Since I wasn't involved in that, I can't answer that directly. You'd have to ask the people that were involved. I don't know.
Okay, but when you were there, he was giving the final approval for the work the legal work that was being performed for Orange.
As far as I know, yes.
Okay, so it's not a stretch to say that that agreement also would have needed final legal work that Mr. Apps would look at?
I think that's, probably a logical conclusion, but I don't have any direct knowledge of that.
Okay. We have correspondence from Mr. Apps that if you follow the, do you want to bring this over for me? This is the exhibit that we all have. It's an email from Mr. Apps, and you are CC'd on it. He's actually writing to Maria and to Jacob, but you're CC'd on it. And the last line says, once we have massaged the game plan past the Minister of Health, I will organize a follow-up private dinner for Chris with the Premier so that he can outline the vision and the game plan in greater detail. This took place on June 20th, 2007. Sorry, I should have given you time to read it. Sorry.
Okay.
All right, so any idea why you were copied on that kind of information?
I probably had been with the organization for, this was June 20th, maybe a couple of months. No, I don't recall why. In fact, I don't even recall this email. I'm sorry,
No,
really don't.
that's okay. Memory is allowed to forget.
Yeah.
and so are you. By the text that you have seen here, Mr. Apps offered a follow-up private dinner for Chris with the Premier. Do you know if this is something that Mr. Apps could have delivered on, knowing you've had some dealing with Mr. Apps? Do you figure he's able to organize dinner with the Premier?
I suppose it's possible. He seemed to have, ability to get people to return his calls.
Okay. And you say this based on?
He was clearly seemed to have relatively high-level connections into the into the government.
Okay. And have you ever seen evidence that he had those connections?
Only through, you know, third party. I was never involved in any of these meetings. I never really was, as I said, I was never involved. So no, I have no direct involvement. But
you just knew because you knew him, you knew the work that he did, and okay. What was the extent of your relationship with Mr. Apps?
You know, we didn't have a very extensive relationship. I was involved in a number of Orange's transactions to negotiate the helicopter acquisition, to negotiate the continuation of the helicopter services agreement, to negotiate the joint venture between Orange and ERA, and Alfred, again, was senior counsel, and the lawyers that he had assigned to work with me on these transactions would report to Alf, and I suppose there may have been occasional either conversations or emails between myself and Alfred, including the rest of the team, that, you know, may have discussed specifics related to those transactions.
Okay. Mr. Apps brought him a consultant by the name of Don Guy. Have you ever heard of this man?
I've heard the name. I've never met him. Okay.
And do you know what Mr. Apps would have brought him and what kind of work he would do for Orange?
No.
No? Okay.
No.
There's also paper trails where Mr. Apps and Mr. Don Guy are trying to arrange meetings for Orange. Any idea why Orange would need to arrange meeting with either the Premier or the Minister of Finance or the Ministry of Health?
No, again, I wasn't involved in any of that.
No. When the change from strictly Orange being run as a non-profit agency to the creation of Orange Peel, which later became Orange Global, were you there at the time when those changes took place?
I was certainly there when Orange Peel was set up. I'm not. Do you know the timing of when Orange Global, when it was changed to Orange Global?
In about the time you were there, Orange Peel started in 2007, and Orange Global at about 2008.
Okay, so yes, I left in August of 2010. So I guess Orange Global was in existence at that point.
Okay. Did you have any dealings with Orange Global?
No, I was always paid by Orange.
Okay, because Orange Global was the agency that owned the helicopter. Were you aware of that?
Yeah, I think someone may have shown me something that said that there was the Orange Global, and then there was something about a trust, Orange Issuer Trust for the bond that was issued or something. But again, I wasn't involved in the structuring of any of that.
Okay. Did it sound okay for you that a agency of the Ministry of Health, you know that your budget came from the provincial government. The provincial government usually deals with not-for-profit agency, certainly when it comes to health care. Was this discussion as to why did we need that trust? Why did we need a for-profit agency under Orange? Was this ever discussed at management?
No, no.
Who made those decisions? Who decided on that corporate structure?
I wasn't involved in any of that structuring or any of those discussions, so I'm afraid I really don't know.
You don't know?
No.
Okay. Did you want to ask?
Yep. So you were speaking about the good morning. You were speaking about the fact that the business strategy or business plan for Orange International, I think you said, wasn't worth the paper that it was written on. I enjoyed that analogy. Now, were you apprised of the overall for-profit side, or is it just one section?
No, I was not, again, involved in anything on what is called the for-profit side. So no, I just, had no involvement there.
Just on that component that you were apprised of, that you were able to speak on and say that, this plan is pretty much worthless. Was it abundantly clear that there was really no effective strategy in that business plan?
Okay, I think we need to clarify here. Sure. In 2007, when I joined Orange, as I said, Orange had previously hired a couple of consultants to write a business plan for international EMS. That was the plan that I felt had no merit, and it was dropped. Orange never pursued that. I understand a few years later, on the for-profit side, there were some other plans, but quite different from the one that these consultants had written. So they're really, I don't know that there was much connection there.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much for that. With respect to, you were speaking on some of the problems overall with Orange and some of the things that you felt uncomfortable with. And one thing that you highlighted was the shift from being medically driven to then becoming part medically driven and part aviation driven. Were there any other concerns that came to your mind in terms of the way Orange was being run?
No, I mean from a straight objective point of view, no, I've outlined the concerns that I have.
Okay.
Unless you have more specific.
Certainly. In terms of the way funds were being allocated and the way money was being distributed in terms of the priorities of the organization, can you comment on that?
No, I wasn't involved in any of that. So, no, I'm afraid I...
And throughout your tenure at Orange, you indicated you were paid by Orange directly?
Yes.
And are you aware if your salary was disclosed on the Sunshine List or if it was ever taken off?
I was an outside consultant the whole time. I was a third-party contractor. I was never an employee.
Okay.
Any reason why you were always a third party? You certainly, like chief operating officer, part of the management team, it could have been, you could have been brought in. Why the reason why this particular arrangement?
It was never offered. I was never asked or offered to become an employee. And as a personal observation, I'm not sure I fit very well in that organization from a number of perspectives. So,
a lot of witnesses have said, hinted the same way you did. Can you describe the culture and how you don't fit in that culture? You had an office there, you saw them every day.
Yeah, it was, there were an awful lot of very dedicated people who worked very hard in that organization, who believed very deeply in the mission that Orange was fulfilling day in and day out. I think that Dr. Mazza, as you may have heard, is and can be a very charming, inspiring person, but he was also emotionally, or the organization was very sort of top-down driven, and there wasn't, Chris would decide, make decisions, and people would then carry out those decisions. So, it was a it was my first and only foray into the public service, if you will, sector. I wasn't familiar with how things operate in that environment, and I think I'm probably more comfortable in the normal for-profit industry.
Not a good example.
This is not the way it's usually done. Did you have any communication with the board, except for that one time where you called Don Lowe? Did you ever communicate anything, made report to the board?
No, that was absolutely strictly forbidden. There was never to be any communication with members of the board other than either through Chris or someone that he may have authorized. So no, that was very much something that wasn't done.
Okay. How much time do I have left?
You have, let's see, you have 7 minutes.
Okay, I'm going to let it go and take a second round instead.
Okay, very well.
Do you want to go now?
Very well. On to the government members and Mr. Moridi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Rothfels, for appearing before this committee. One of your former colleagues at Orange, who was Associate Vice President, Ms. Kelly Long, did you know her?
I knew her, yes.
In what capacity did you know her?
You know, she worked on other areas of the business that I had no involvement in, so I really had virtually no dealings at all with her on a work basis.
Did you know her special relationship with Dr. Mazza? Were you aware of that?
Not right away, but things don't stay secret in an organization all that long, so eventually, rumors circulated.
And what was your impression of her work at Orange?
As I said, I wasn't involved. I had no involvement with her, so I really don't know.
She started as a junior person at Orange, and then she moved up to the position of basically executive positions, associate vice president, very quickly. So the promotion was very fast in an organization for a person to begin with a junior position and then reaches to a higher executive position in a short time. What do you think that the reason for her very fast promotion in the organization?
And Mr. Moridi, if I can ask you to pull your mic down a little closer.
Oh, sorry.
I'm having trouble hearing you. Thanks.
Sorry.
Well, again, since I wasn't involved in any of the work that she was doing, or really any areas that she was involved in, I honestly don't, I don't have a way to evaluate what she did, how she did it, whether she did it well or not. I simply wasn't involved.
So do you think that Dr. Mazza's decision to promote her was a proper decision, just in your own opinion?
Again, I have no way of giving you an objective answer to that, since I can't, I don't know what she did or how she did it.
So you had no dealings with her
Not
in her
not
capacity and in your capacity?
No, not within the organization, no.
What's your general opinion about Dr. Mazza? Just give us a picture of what you think about him.
Well, I think, as I said earlier, I think he's a somewhat complicated fellow. He can be charming and brilliant and inspiring. He can also be emotionally driven, volatile, demanding. So I guess there's all different sides to him.
How would be his relationship or his interaction with the employees as a boss of the company? How would you explain that?
Pretty much the way I just described him. He could be any of the above. Mm-hmm. You never knew.
Was he very controlling in terms of...
Yes. Yes.
And then the staff, even senior staff, they have been controlled directly by him?
Yes. You were told what to do, and you were expected to do it.
Okay. Were there any possibility that senior staff, at least the vice president, associate vice president, directors, people on those levels, would report something to the members of the board of directors, or board of...
This is more opinion than anything. There may have been some relationships, but as far as I knew, there was a very strict rule in place that there was to be no communication to the board other than as authorized by Chris or through Chris?
You were chief operating officer of a corporation called Orange International, and initially, earlier today, you mentioned that this corporation didn't exist, and apparently it didn't exist because it didn't exist. It didn't appear at the Auditor General's report. There's no mention about this this corporation, and you were there for 3 years, I believe, right?
A little over 3 years, yeah.
2007 to 2011. And you were chief COO, chief operating officer of this organization. And this organization wasn't an incorporated organization, was it?
Not that I know of, no.
So when they appointed you as CEO of this organization, did you know that this organization is basically a phony organization?
You know, I think when I first joined, the intention was, as I said, that they had this business plan that these consultants had written to do this international EMS repatriation. So I think there may have been an intent to form a company along that line. When I, and others said, you know, this business plan is simply not viable, I guess they never bothered to incorporate any company because there was no business for it to do. And then I was pulled off to do other things like the helicopter acquisitions and other matters.
But you have been there for 3 years as the CEO of this unincorporated corporation from 2007 to 2010. And of course you signed various communications, letters, emails under that title. Did it never occur to you to ask the question saying, well, you know, I'm the CEO of this corporation which doesn't exist legally. Could you do something about this? Could you either move this away from this position or incorporate this entity?
No, I never did. It didn't particularly concern me. There was never Orange International Corp. Or Inc. or anything like that. It just said Orange International. So there was, I guess there's an implied that there's a company there, but there never was, and it never said anything like that. And no, maybe it should have bothered me, but it didn't.
Well, your CV or resume basically outlines that you know, between 2007 and 2010 you were Chief Operating Officer of Orange International, and within that period you have done quite a number of works for the company, including negotiations on helicopter purchases from Augusta Westland and others, and ERA as well. So I mean, as a senior person yourself, Mr. Rothfeld, when you have been appointed to such a position, and then you will say, well, you know, it's not a 1 day, 2 days, a 3 day period, and then various activities conducted by yourself under the title of COO for this phony corporation, and never incorporated, and then you kept basically continuing work under that title. And even you put it in your resume that within those 3 years you carried that title for a phony corporation. Would this any time bother you, or did you ask any question from, say, Dr. Mazza, saying that, you know, I'm CEO of this corporation, when are you going to incorporate this?
Well, first of all, I don't think I agree with the characterization of it as a phony corporation. It was a title that was given. There was, you know, I guess if I had given it much thought, which I probably didn't, I would have thought if there ever was a business that international that I would ever get involved in, that maybe they would incorporate something, but I was never involved in anything that would give rise to the need for that. So.
Well, they called it Orange International, as they had various oranges, right, within the main company. So this wasn't a branch of, say, Orange, a division of Orange, or an office of Orange. It seemed to everyone that this is a corporation. It has chief operating officer. Anyway, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'll pass on to
Mr. Zimmer?
Mr. Zimmer to continue.
Very well. Mr. Zimmer.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. The marketing services agreement, the marketing services agreement that was negotiated. So the lead into that is this business of the weight upgrade charge of $600,000 per helicopter. So times 12 is $7.2 million. And we heard from Mr. Potter that he went back to Augusta and quickly negotiated or told them that Orange wasn't going to pay the $600,000 times 12 helicopters. And he went back to Chris Mazza and told him the good news, and said frankly that he was expecting sort of a pat in the back and a comment, job well done, you saved us $7.2 million. And that Mazza's reaction was, as you've said and as Potter said, he was not keen on that, and in fact gave the direction to pay the full price. And Potter was asked what his reaction to that, the direction from Mazza was, and he said, and I'm quoting from Hansard, Potter said to Mazza, quote, "Are you frigging crazy?" Is that a characterization that you would agree with?
Yes.
With respect to Mazda's view of that?
Yeah, it was surprising.
Okay. Well, you say surprising. Potter is a little more colorful and says he thought Mazza was, quote, frigging crazy. Do you agree with that? That stronger characterization?
I'll stay with it was surprising. I wasn't, there may have been other things that I wasn't aware of, but on the surface, it certainly was surprising.
So, why do you say it was surprising, or why do you think Potter, who's an aviation expert rather than a medical guy, thought it was frigging crazy? What do you think what was wrong with it that made Potter think it was frigging crazy, and you say more diplomatically it was surprising?
Well, I think we were both aware that under the terms of the aircraft purchase agreement, there was no need to pay this.
Are you aware of any speculation floating around the executive team as to what might have motivated Mazza to say, let's pay it anyway, thanks for negotiating the reduction, but let's pay it anyway? There must have been gossip around the executive corridors. Why is the boss doing this? We've just set it up so we can save $7.2 million, and the boss doesn't want to take the savings. There must have been gossip and rumors and conversation in the executive team. Was there?
I'm sure there was. I didn't really participate much in that, but things were somewhat siloed, and so if people stuck to what they were told to do, if there was speculation about it, there may also have been, because Chris was involved in direct discussions with senior people at Augusta, maybe there was something else going on that other people weren't aware of.
But absent being aware of what those other considerations might be, the sentiment was that it was surprising, or it was frigging crazy that he was doing this.
I don't think anybody understood.
Okay. Did you ever see the marketing services agreement that was put in place?
No.
Did you ever become aware of the terms of the marketing service agreement?
No, I was not.
Who was working on it, that sort of thing?
Well, I knew that there was a marketing services agreement being put into place, and I knew that Cindy Hines and Maria Renzella had been directed to make it happen.
And did you know who was going to be the frontline person on putting, doing the research and doing the marketing services?
No. No.
In your resume, you speak of, you've got an item here, 2007 to 2010, Chief Operating Officer, Orange International, and one of the things that you did in that capacity and during that time frame, the last third bullet point on your resume, the negotiation with ERA, E-R-A, and the creation of a joint venture to assume the direct responsibility for Orange's rotary wing operations. That's one of the first times I've come across ERA. What is ERA? Who is ERA?
ERA is ERA Helicopters. They're a wholly owned subsidiary of a New York Stock Exchange company called Secor. They're one of the largest fleet operators of the AW-139 in the world. They're based in, their headquarters is New York. Their main base of operations is in Louisiana, but they have operations in many parts of the world.
And did you in fact create a joint venture service with them to assume the responsibility of the rotary wing operations of Orange?
Yes, we negotiated a joint venture agreement. I believe the the joint venture company was created, and ERA owned, I think, 25% of that. Orange owned 75%. But I left the organization shortly after that the joint venture had been created, and as I understand it, the agreements were never implemented.
And two questions. What was the purpose of that? What was the strategic objective of that joint venture agreement, and who initiated the idea and negotiated the agreement?
The purpose was that because Orange had no institutional history or internal capability to operate these rotary wing aircraft, I think it was mainly my idea that we should bring in somebody who knew what they were doing to help Orange in this getting up to speed and learning how to do this and learning how to maintain these aircraft and staff them and pilot them and train the pilots and manage spare parts. This is a very, very complex undertaking where Orange had no history or capability. So we thought, let's bring in somebody who really does know what they're doing.
And then you've said that that agreement, in fact, did not take effect?
That's my understanding. After I left, the agreement was essentially left to wither on the vine.
So the agreement, the operations contemplated by the agreement never took off.
That's
never
correct.
Took effect.
Yeah, Orange just did it itself.
You have a couple minutes, Mr. Zimmer.
With respect to Chris Mazza, I've been sitting here now for days and days and days with my colleagues, and I've been following all of the evidence, and for the most part, in fact, probably to a person, every witness talks about the difficulty or the challenges of dealing with Chris Mazza's personality, and generally the theme seems to be that he was mercurial, he was aggressive, he was secretive, he was up, he was down. A very difficult relationship to manage. And I can't help but getting the sense that, there must be, in my amateur reading, there are sort of elements of almost a bipolar disorder here, the way he fluctuated in his management style. Would you agree with that?
I have no medical background. I'm not. I don't think I'm qualified to comment. I can, simply say that that Chris was. At times, it was challenging to deal with him.
And could you give me a couple of examples, what you mean by challenging? Give me one good example of a challenging situation you had with Mazza, in terms of interacting with him as one of his executive officers. Just so I get the flavor.
Right. In general, his management style did not include an open discussion of issues. He would make a decision, he would announce the decision, people were expected to follow that through. And I often questioned, myself, the thought process, analysis, or logic that may have gone into that decision when I, may not have agreed with it. And areas of aviation where I felt I had some significant competence, yet decisions were made that, frankly, I found difficult to understand.
Yeah, and yet on paper...
Pretty much out of time.
For the whole time?
No, you'll have another 12 minutes.
We'll bite in yet, let Mr. Zimmer carry on.
Okay.
Carry on with the 12.
Go ahead.
And yet, the irony is that on paper, Dr. Mazza obviously is a very intelligent person. He's a highly trained physician, trauma physician, emergency medicine, MBA training. Academically, I expect, he was probably a star in his studies and so on. So how do you account for someone with that apparent level of at least academic intelligence not being able to function as a chief executive, at least vis-a-vis his executive team?
I wouldn't say that he wasn't able to function. I think that there's quite a difference between going to school and learning stuff out of a book and then being in the real world where you have to operate in a much messier environment than what you see in textbooks and what you learn at school. Chris had never run an organization like Orange. Chris had no background in aviation and had no experience, and so he was making, so it wasn't a matter of whether he was bright or intelligent. He is. He just, there wasn't any experience there in business, in aviation, in the areas where he was now suddenly involved, and he had nothing on which to fall back.
So given that, and given your executive experience yourself, when you were recruited to join Orange, you must have done your own due diligence. That is, well, who's the CEO? What's the CEO all about? What's his personality? What's his vision? What's his background? Is this a place that I, as a experienced executive professional, is this an environment that I want to join up with? And obviously you said yes. So given what you knew about Mazza's background or his inexperience in the area and so on, what motivated you to take up the challenge and join the executive team? I mean, a lot of people might have looked into it and said, I'm going to steer clear of this. Nothing good can come of this, but you joined. I'm not being critical of that. Right. I'm just asking why.
Right. Well, in hindsight, of course, that's a very valid point. I met Chris probably 2 or 3 times before we decided to work together. And as I said, Chris can be a very inspiring, very charming, very just a charming guy. He was very passionate about the mission that Orange needed to accomplish in terms of the, being the service that provides this medical transportation on this great geographic scale and complexity, needed some aviation help, and was quite passionate about needing someone who could help him make this really the service he always wanted it to be. So, did I look into his background? Yes, I did. And I saw all of these great things that you've described in terms of his medical background and MBA and all the rest of that. I met him a few times, and I thought, I've done all this work in the private or for-profit sector. There was an element, I suppose, I don't want to go too far down this, but there may have been an element, I suppose, of saying, well, if I can help in this sort of public service way, then maybe I should do that too.
And so even an experienced and seasoned executive, as you are, which is evident in your resume, in your years and years of experience in the course of a doing some background checks, and more importantly, in the course of 3 or 4 meetings or so with Chris, and I'm not being critical in this, but you too got caught up in the charming manic of his personality and his vision.
I'd like to think I'm a little more objective than just being charmed by a pretty face and a good story, but there may have been an element of that, but there clearly was a need in this organization and in talking to him and others for the aviation expertise that I could bring to the table.
Well, most of the other people that have appeared before the committee have talked about recognizing the need of doing the air ambulance piece and doing it properly for the people of Ontario, and so there was that, plus the magnetic, charming, visionary, dynamic personality of Dr. Mazza that attracted them. Is that a fair summary of how you got involved in this?
I think that was certainly an element of it, yes. Yep.
And in so what lessons have you learned as a seasoned executive as a result of this difficult relationship that you entered into for a while and are now out of?
Well, I think you take away learnings from every situation. Much of it, I'd have to say, was positive in that there are a tremendous number of highly dedicated and skilled people in Orange who work really hard to deliver the service under trying and difficult circumstances, and it was inspiring to be part of that. It wasn't an entirely positive experience, as I think we've talked about today, and as I'm sure you've heard from other people who've appeared here. And that's unfortunate, because I think that, again, the vast majority of the people that work at Orange are now forced to work in an organization that has a black cloud over it, and they see their organization being dragged through the mud. They had no involvement in that.
So what are the couple of big lessons you've taken away from this experience?
Well, I suppose if anything, that I'd be very leery of anything involved with an agency in the public service sector, because it clearly operates under different rules than what I'm used to.
If you want any time left, you might want to wrap up.
Thank you.
Okay, very well. We'll move to Mr. Klees, and you have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Rothfeld. You've been very helpful. I think what you've confirmed is something that we learned this past week, and that is that the government was warned by senior civil servants not to go down this track. The fact that you've made it very clear that Dr. Mazza neither had the experience nor the background, certainly no experience in aviation, to take on what was a monumental undertaking, a great concept, but the core competencies were not there to actually deliver on it. And I think that's why we're here today. We're here because what was a good intention just simply did not have the core competencies to be able to deliver on that. I'd like to just ask you this. You confirmed for us that you had serious concerns about a number of aspects of the Orange operation. You confirmed that you had very serious concerns about the kickback document, the marketing agreement that made no sense. There was no financial background to it. You expressed that concern to Ms. Renzella. You expressed that concern to Cynthia Hines, who was the lawyer for Orange. You warned them for whatever reason. They chose to ignore that warning and carried on, and as you say, they ended up papering that document. You confirmed that you expressed your concern to one of the directors of the board, Mr. Lowe, who has fiduciary responsibilities. the fact that none of these people came forward and assumed their responsibilities, whether that be as an executive, whether that be as a director of the board, and none of this was exposed until such time as it became a public embarrassment to, obviously, not only Orange, but the government. And so we're here today to determine really two things. First, what went wrong and who was responsible. You've been very helpful to us in that. More important is what has to be done to move forward and restore confidence in this province's air ambulance system. Now, what we're hearing about the lack of confidence and the lack of experience and the lack of institutional knowledge about the air carrier side of this industry. Sir, nothing has changed since you left. In fact, when you left, you were probably the person who was bringing that experience to the organization. We have an organization that's flailing. I saw a report yesterday that is riddled with incident reports about individuals patients dying because either a lack of competence on the dispatch side, a lack of competence on the part of the individuals who are doing the staffing, understaffed bases, whether that be for pilots or for paramedics. We have a serious problem. And I think that unless the government gets serious about hearing from people like yourself who are telling us that this is a fundamentally flawed structure, that we need some competency, certainly on the air carrier side. Until we do that, more people are going to die. We're going to continue to have the kind of incident reports that we're getting almost on a daily basis. I'd like to know from you, the recommendation has been made. In fact, I think Mr. Bloom, amongst others, stated in their testimony here that the only way to move forward is to pause, to restructure this, to admit that mistakes were made, that the competencies are not there, that the air carrier side of this air ambulance service has to be rethought, that we get back to the point where we contract out that competency, because it is out there. It was done before Orange under a third-party contracting basis to air carriers who are stationed throughout the province, who have the ability, they have the knowledge, they have the experience, they have the ability to staff, and that we refocus and get the public side of this back into the business of actually focusing on the healthcare side. That to try to be all things to all people is how we ended up here. I would just like your thoughts on that and take advantage of your experience, your insight into this organization. Now that you're not there, can you give us some guidance in terms of just your thoughts on next steps?
Yeah. First of all, I think your concerns are very valid, and that there's an established model out there in the world for what Orange probably should do, and the best example is Federal Express. FedEx, for many of its air operations, owns the aircraft and then subcontracts private contractors to operate them on behalf of Federal Express. And there's a couple reasons for that. First of all, FedEx has access to capital, and their capital cost is lower than these contractors. But even more importantly, it gives FedEx the chance to make sure that that service is being delivered on the most cost-effective basis with industry players who are known to have good safety records, who are being audited regularly by the regulatory authorities, whether it's Transport Canada or the FAA or whatever it is, and FedEx does their own internal audits. And it allows FedEx to change operators and put the contract out to competitive bid on a regular basis without worrying about who has the appropriate assets to be able to supply the service. Orange has exactly the same situation. When the contract with CHL, the rotary wing operator, came up for renewal, the problem was that Orange couldn't find anybody else to bid on it because no one had the aircraft. You just can't find 10 or 12 of these expensive aircraft properly equipped lying around waiting for somebody to pick up a contract. So there simply wasn't a way to take this contract away from CHL and give it to someone else because CHL owned the assets. So I think that the Orange model that probably makes sense is there's nothing wrong with owning the assets, and then you can put them out to competitive bid on a regular basis. There is a significant difference, though, in trying to operate those assets. So what you've suggested in terms of get back to a medically focused organization, have the private air carriers operate the air service under, Transport Canada guidance and regulations, proper audits by Orange, making sure that they're following the requirements that Orange lays out, is probably a model that would make a lot of sense.
You're way out of time, and the NDP will move to the NDP, and you have 12 minutes.
Thank you. You've said a few times that you haven't worked in the public sector before, and given that experience, that you're happy to go back to the private sector. Did you know that there was a performance agreement between the government and Orange?
I'd heard the words performance agreement, and I was vaguely aware that that was the basis under which Orange operated, yes.
You had never seen it?
Not that I know of, no.
Okay,
no.
so the part of the agreement that had directly to do with aviations were never shared with you?
No.
So it was there. Part of it was squarely had to do with aviation, but it was never shared with you. You were never asked to report on it, anything of the sort?
No, not at all.
All right, that's reassuring. I'm joking. It's not reassuring at all. So, do you know if anybody else reported on the performance agreement? Anybody else let the government, who was the payer, really know what was going on?
No, I don't know.
You don't know? It was not something that was talked about? It was not something that you had to worry about because it was never brought to your attention?
Correct. I was the aviation guy. I was put over in a corner and said, do aviation stuff.
Okay, make sure the aircrafts are there when we need them and perform the way we want them to perform.
Yeah.
Okay. And did you want to ask your question now? Okay.
You indicated there was some business consulting